Welcome to Your Future in Sales and Marketing, a podcast that helps you make great career decisions to get the most out of your career journey. We'll introduce you to the AXR network of established senior leaders and a handpicked group of future aspiring leaders who have it all in front of them. You'll learn what it's like in the top job and how to get there. Your hosts from AXR's specialist sales and marketing recruitment team will also land bonus episodes for you on how to work with recruiters, write a resume, and smash an interview, as well as our very popular market updates. It's the podcast that has it all. You can't get this career advice anywhere else. Welcome to another episode of Your Future in Sales and Marketing. I'm Andrew Cannock. I'm a specialist recruiter in commercial FMCG roles, and I'm delighted to be joined on the pod today by Sarah Quinn. Sarah is the head of independence at Campari, and at the time we're recording this, she's just finishing up her appointment as acting sales director for the off-trade business. Sarah, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Andrew. Thank you for having me here.
Great to have you. So before we jump in, we'll do our normal kickoff question. What is your favorite brand? Why? And you can't pick one that you've worked on.
Okay. This is actually a pretty easy one for me to answer, but I am slightly concerned it might make me sound a little bit basic, but that's okay. That's who I am. Anyone who knows me knows that I love clothes and I love colour. And I say clothes as opposed to fashion because I'm not always about following the latest trends. So my favorite brand, and about 90% of my wardrobe comes from here, is Country Road. I love that it is an Australian brand. I love that they have good basics, but they also have some amazing statement, colourful pieces. I have a pink neon sequin top from Country Road, which is one of my all-time favourites. I love the fact that they're really leaning into sustainable sourcing of their fabrics. They do loyalty so well. I think because I've spent so many thousands of dollars with them over the years, I can't remember if I'm gold or platinum now, but they're always, giving me another voucher to spend in store to bring me back in. You get early access to their sales and their spend and saves, which are pretty legendary. So yeah, it's Country Road for me. Love it.
Great. And don't worry, I am very, very basic, so I'm on board with that. Country Road is a great brand. They just don't make trousers long enough for me, unfortunately, which is a shame.
Yeah, see, I have the opposite problem and I have to get everything taken up.
Taken up. Awesome. Before we dive into career, tell us a bit about life before that. Where did you grow up?
Okay, it's not a simple answer to that question. So I was actually born in Bangkok, Thailand. As you can tell from the red hair, freckles and blue eyes, my dad had a job there when I was a kid. We moved to London when I was 2 and I grew up in northeast London. Look, it was right on the border with Essex and I did go to school in Essex. So if you want to call me an Essex girl, go ahead, that's fine. Then when I was 15, we moved to Taipei, Taiwan. I remember Dad coming home and saying, yep, we're moving to Taiwan, kids, at the end of the year. And all I really knew about Taiwan at the time was that lots of cheap stuff got made there. But off we went. I had just started year 9 and landed in Taipei and went to Taipei American School there, so an expat school, but, surrounded by everything was in Chinese characters. The locals all spoke Mandarin, but it was so much fun, for anyone listening who grew up as an expat brat, as we like to call ourselves, like me, knows that being a teenage expat it's so much fun. You live in this bubble where life just revolves around kind of school, the American club, your friends. I got to learn Mandarin and I also got to reinvent myself, halfway through high school. That's a pretty fun thing to get to do. And, I'd come from, even though I was at a selective school in London, it still wasn't cool to be smart. And I was always a little bit of a nerd. I used to get called a boffin. It's a term that I don't think exists in Australia.
I haven't had that term in years.
Yeah. But then, moving to Taipei and TAS was 95% Chinese. And it wasn't cool to not be smart. So that was really, really culturally different. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then as I finished high school, my dad's job moved to Sydney, Australia, and I was due to take up a university place back in the UK. Leeds University in the north. And my parents moved a few months before I did. And then I got to Sydney. It was supposed to be a 3-week holiday in Sydney and then move over back to the UK to Leeds. And I got to Sydney, and one of my best friends from Taipei had moved to Australia the year before me. She was the year above me. And I got to Sydney and my friend introduced me to all of her friends and we were having so much fun. And then I remember being on a bus going over the Harbour Bridge, heading into the city to meet my friend and looking out at the Sydney Opera House as I was travelling across the bridge on this beautiful sunny winter's day in June. And I thought, why on earth would I go back to the UK when I could keep living here? And so I went home that night and I said, Mum, Dad, I don't want to go back to England. I'd like to stay here. And they were like, great. And so, after spending years deciding which universities to apply to in the UK, I ended up finding out who would take me halfway through the year, because different semesters in the Southern Hemisphere, and took a place at UNSW studying languages. And I've been here ever since. So 27 years later, still here.
I think a lot of Brits have had that moment of realisation when they've been here visiting or travelling and they just don't want to leave. And you made it work.
Yeah.
I love that you've had so much variety, even in your early life. And I feel like you've taken that through into your career because you've had a really diverse path to get to where you are. You've gone from creative agencies into FMCG and now leadership roles in liquor. Walk us through that journey. How did you get to this point?
Yeah, there's been a lot of different roads that I've travelled over the last 20 years. So I kind of fell into working for this IT startup while I was still at uni. This was sort of the late 90s, early 2000s, sort of around the time of that .com boom, and everyone wanted to work in tech. And I was temping in the holidays at AMP Bank, and then an opportunity came up for the technology provider for the bank that was this small New Zealand IT startup, and I started working for them. And, that was a lot of fun, IT startup back in the early noughties. Then I decided I wanted to do something more creative, and I just finished uni and I started doing this graphic design course at college and found a role at a small graphic design agency. And I realized very quickly that I was never going to be a brilliant graphic designer. My husband is a graphic designer. He's a very good graphic designer, and, he's happy to keep tinkering and tinkering and tinkering until he's got it exactly right. Whereas I'm very much tick it off, move on. 80% today is better than 100% tomorrow. And that's never going to make for a great creative. But I loved creativity. And so I thought, what industry can I work in that will still give me that creativity, but allow me to lean into the driver that I am and the completer finisher? And I thought that advertising sounded like the perfect mix of that. And so I applied for the Advertising Federation of Australia's graduate trainee program, and I got placed at Saatchi & Saatchi. So this was back in 2004, and it was such an exciting time to work in advertising at a creative agency. Saatchi's it was an amazing place to work. We had the best accounts in Australia, really iconic brands, an incredible mix of people, and we just had so much fun. It was very much work hard, play hard. You'd sometimes be at work when you were working on a pitch till 2, 3 in the morning, and then you'd have to be back at 7 a.m. to actually take all the work to the pitch. And back then it was all mounted on foam core boards. Very different now, I'm sure. But we were also, we were a full service agency back then. When I first started, they still had media buying. So it was before media and creative agencies separated. And the first account I worked on, so I got hired from being a grad to being an account manager quite quickly, and I got to work on Emirates Airline. It was back when they were launching in Australia, and that was a lot of fun. I then moved on to, as it was known back then, Lion Nathan and Tui's New. That was my first foray into liquor. And we did some amazing campaigns for Tui's New. We shot things into the air and rained beer on Sydney. We did the Tall Men campaign with the giant inflatables. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And actually, some of the people I worked with back then who were our clients, I still work with today in the liquor industry. It's an industry that people don't like to leave. And then the last brand I worked on was Lexus, so part of the Toyota group. And at the time, Toyota was the biggest car company in the world. A lot's changed in the last 15 years with EV, but it was an amazing, amazing brand to work on. It was a fun time to be in advertising.
I'm sure. And then what was the pivot point from agency life at Saatchi & Saatchi into the FMCG world with Blackmores?
Yeah, the pivot point was when we were no longer the only agency at the table. So when I first started at Saatchi's, as I said, we even had media buying. We were everything to our clients. So we did strategy, we had digital, we had PR, we had print design, we had a TV production department, we had radio production, and we were really driving the strategy and creative and media for our clients. That was back in 2004. By the time it got to 2010, we'd go to these strategy planning days with our clients, and we'd be one of 5, 6, 7, 8 agencies at the table. It's really changed, and that's very much still the case today. And I realized that if I wanted to be really driving the strategy for a brand, I needed to go client side. So I started looking around for companies that interested me. And back in 2010, health and wellness was really starting to boom, and an opportunity came up at Blackmores, the vitamin company. And I also at the time really wanted to lean into digital. Digital was absolutely exploding. Brands were just starting to become active on social media, which back then was really just Facebook and Twitter. And an opportunity came up to be the digital manager at Blackmores, running the digital team. And so I grabbed that. It was also pretty local to me on the Northern Beaches. And I will be forever grateful for my time at Blackmores because I got to do so many different things. When I first moved there, running the digital team as a mat leave cover, opportunity then came up to move into their business development team, which was running M&A. And I got to work on the acquisition of Bioceuticals when Blackmores acquired that company, which was so fascinating, getting to support with writing board papers and presenting to the board and seeing how you build the financials to acquire a company was just an incredible experience. From there, I moved into the category team. So it was a newly formed category team, and I was the grocery channel manager in the category team. And then while I was on my second maternity leave, the category director became the sales director, and he convinced me to move into the sales team when I came back from mat leave. I remember I came in for sort of a check-in about 3 months or so before I was due to come back, and Eric said, "What are you thinking for when you come back?" And I said, I think I'd like to go back into brand. I think marketing is what I'd like to do next. And he said, "Oh, that's great. I'd like you to come and run the Woolworths business." And I said, "Oh, no, sales isn't for me. I've done account management. When I was in advertising, I'm not interested." And he said, "No, Sarah, being in account management in sales is very different to advertising. You're responsible for a P&L, and I really think you'll enjoy it." And so I spoke to some trusted friends and advisors for advice, and they were like, "Go for it. It's another string to your bow." So I was like, "Okay, let's do it." And so I came back from mat leave, so 2 small children, and running the Woolworths business for Blackmores. And this was back in 2016, and it was when vitamins were absolutely booming. So it was after Australia had signed the free trade agreement with China, as they called it, the Daigou trade had sprung up, and there were certain products that just people were going nuts for them in China. So we couldn't make enough fish oil, glucosamine, vitamin C. It was just insane. We went from when we'd run a big sale of 50% off in Woolies on fish oil, we'd gone from the year prior, you might do 20,000 units in a week, to they wanted 120,000 units in a week. It was a wild ride. It was an amazing time to work at Blackmores.
Yeah. Sometimes we all need someone who sees something in us and encourages us to take a bit of a leap of faith.
Yeah.
So Blackmores was a real mix across different functions and roles. What were your biggest takeaways from that time you spent there?
So the first one is that Eric was absolutely right. I love sales, and I love the fact that you feel like you're running a business within a business. You get to touch all parts of the business. You're dealing with supply chain, customer service, marketing, trade marketing, finance, as well as the rest of the sales team and the field team. It's so much fun. So that was a big learning, but also it showed me that if I was prepared to take a leap of faith and lean into trying something different and sort of getting over my imposter syndrome and going, you know what, you can do this. You can use Excel, you can use PowerPoint, you can communicate, just give it a go. And I love the variety and the difference. I'm someone who, my values are really around courage and curiosity. And I always want to be learning and I always want to be developing and trying new things. And so Blackmore's really satisfied that urge within me. So it was a great company and I'm really grateful for the time I had there.
Then you made the move to Campari and you've had great progression there through multiple roles and then eventually stepped in as acting sales director for off-trade. What do you think helped you build and maintain that internal momentum within Campari?
I think what helped me build that momentum within Campari was, there were a couple of things. The first was that the development opportunities that Campari gave me pretty much from the day I arrived there were just amazing. I remember, I think it was only the second or third week I was there, we had this incredible Campari way of people management training program where they had this global team fly in from Milan and they ran it for a few days. And it was honestly one of the best training courses I've ever done in my life. I got to go to a commercial academy training course in Milan at Campari's head office. I was lucky enough to be put forward for the Drinks Association's mentor program. And I've also had incredible leaders as well. My first sales director when I was at Campari, Pete White, was just an incredible manager and an incredible leader. And he gave me some very challenging feedback pretty early on when we first started working together, but it was feedback I'd never had before. I'd never had someone give me feedback, not just on the what I was doing, but the how I was doing it. And I'd never considered that before. I'd come from businesses where it was like, as long as you were hitting your numbers, it didn't really matter how you behaved. And Pete really worked with me on that. I mentioned earlier, I'm a completer finisher and I'm a driver and I can have a tendency to be incredibly direct. And Pete worked with me to try and soften that natural tendency that I have. And I think it was just leaning into all the development opportunities, making the most of them. And whenever an opportunity comes up, grab it by both hands and make the most of it.
Pete helped you become a well-rounded camperista by the sound of things. Yeah,
he did.
So although you decided that creative pathway early in your career wasn't for you, there's clearly a bit of a creative flair there. Has that influenced your leadership style or anything that you've done in your career since then?
Yeah, definitely. Creativity is such an important part of my life. I love art and music and theatre, but I think the way you can bring creativity to the way that you communicate, the way you interact with your team, with your customers, making things fun. It just makes everything more enjoyable. And I think also if you can communicate to your team, the message of why things are being done in a fun and creative way, they're much more likely to get on board than outlining a list of rules and regulations. So yeah, definitely.
So you've been wearing two hats for a while. One of those hats being acting sales director for the off-trade business at Campari. What does that role look like day to day?
Yeah, it's been a very busy 12 months. So I was running the Coles business at Campari for 6 years. And it was great because I got to really understand liquor, which is quite unique in the way that it functions versus the rest of FMCG and to make some really great connections across the industry. And about probably 3-4 years in, I knew that what I wanted to do next was to work in indies. And the reason for that was I knew I wanted to become, my North Star was to become a managing director one day. In order to do that, I needed to be a sales director first. And in order to do that, working in the indies, as we call them, was a really core part of that. Independent liquor is more than 50% of our business at Campari. And people are often surprised outside of liquor to hear how huge independent liquor is versus the chains. And the opportunity to step into the head of indies role finally came up early last year at the same time as our sales director at the time going on mat leave and giving me the opportunity to at the same time pick up sales director duties. So it was kind of all your Christmases coming at once and meant that I was learning, a new channel. I was taking on a new team at the same time as picking up the sales director duties. So I learned an awful lot very quickly. It was definitely a pressure cooker, particularly the first 6-7 months. And at the same time, we got a new managing director who was new to Australia. So day-to-day life with what I'm doing, I think it's settled down a bit in the last 3 months as I've kind of managed to get my head above water and find my stride. But generally, you always start the day with the number. How's it tracking? How are you looking month to date? And then it's really about team. I've got 9 direct reports, so 6 as part of my head of indies role, then another 3 in my acting sales director role. So it's making sure that you're giving enough time to all of the people in your team, but then also needing to find time to leaning into those strategic direction discussions that you're having as part of the leadership team. So it's very much been a case of delegation, prioritization, and being absolutely rigorous with time management and my diary, and really questioning whether I need to be at a meeting or not. Can I delegate that to someone else in my team? Do I really need to be there? You've just got to be ruthless with your time.
I love the emphasis on it's calmed down a bit in the last 3 months. No doubt it's still crazy. So you've now worked across a few different channels. You looked after Coles, you spent time in e-commerce, now independence. We often encourage salespeople to spend time working in different channels because they operate quite differently. What have you learned about how those different channels work and what makes them tick?
I think the fundamental piece of learning for me has been that whilst these channels do operate differently and they do execute differently, at the end of the day, with all of them, you're dealing with humans and you're dealing with people. And I have always really drummed into my team that it is so important to be not just easy to do business with, but a pleasure to do business with. You want to be the person that when your name comes up on your buyer's phone screen, they are happy to take your call. And, being a pleasure to do business with doesn't mean that you say yes to everything. It means that anything that is asked for, you are delivering it with every I dotted, every T crossed, and ideally you are delivering it before the deadline. You are respectful of your buyer's time. If you can finish meetings early, you should. Don't try and fill up the time. And the other thing is that, you want to be a really valuable source of information, insights, and ideas, so that when there are new and different challenges that your customers are coming up with, you're the person that they want to come to. But at the same time, really important that you are not afraid to have challenging conversations with them. The only way your customers are going to respect you is if you will from time to time say no, push back respectfully. It's incredibly important to have that level of trust and respect.
Great. I think there's some absolute gold in there for salespeople listening, particularly the part around being a source of insights and information as well. Because I think a lot of account managers, particularly early in career, naturally, they're very inclined to think about delivering their number for their business. And I think the ones who can really elevate their thinking and create more value for their buyers as well are the ones that will succeed. So that's great. And you touched there on starting the day with the number. Where are we at here and now? How are we tracking? But then also thinking longer term strategically. How do you balance working across those two time horizons, the short term delivery of now and the longer term strategic piece?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that's always the challenge, right? It's how do you continue to upgrade the plane while you're flying it and making sure that you're still focused on that end destination and working out whether that destination's maybe changed. For me, that has been about, again, it comes back to the being ruthless with your diary piece and carving out time to work on strategy and strategic thinking and carving out time to be able to think. I find if something isn't in my diary, it doesn't happen. And so I do try to block out time when I'm not going to have meetings. I'm not going to be having one-to-ones. It's not going to be sitting down with finance and forecasting. But also I find quite often it's good, and it's been very challenging to do this with how busy it's been over the last 12 months. But sometimes it's going for that walk in the evening or on the weekend and not automatically sticking a podcast or an audiobook in your ears, or even music sometimes, but just letting your mind wander. And sometimes that's the best way to ponder those curly challenges that may have come up during the week, or think about strategy sessions you've got coming up of how you can best do them. And that's when I find some of the best ideas come to me when I'm out walking.
And that time to actually think and just be with your thoughts is increasingly hard to find these days. You need to be very intentional with it. As someone now sitting on a leadership team and who's led teams over your career, what does great leadership look like to you?
I've been fortunate to have some really great leaders over my career. And, I mentioned Pete White earlier. And what was so great about Pete was that he would give me really honest and direct feedback. But at the same time, I absolutely knew that he had my back and that he would support me no matter what, whilst at the same time being a really great strategic and long-term thinker. And I think challenging us to think differently and how could we bring more valuable insights and category thinking to our customers. Someone who will challenge you respectfully, but also support you.
Great. Something we are quite passionate about at AXR is promoting females in sales leadership roles. Over time, the function has evolved, and now over 40% of national account managers are female, which wasn't the case too long ago. What's your journey been like as a female in sales?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think back to some of those first supplier meetings that I would go to at Woolworths more than 10 years ago now. And you'd walk into this, huge function space, and it would just be a sea of dark suits, black, grey and navy. And then there would be me in my neon pink or neon yellow as this like flash of colour. And there'd only be a few other flashes of colour throughout the room. That's really has changed a lot. And I mean, at Campari, our off-trade sales leadership team is all women, actually. So it's definitely changed. There's some amazing female sales directors out there, Kerry Apertura at Lion. And, when I came to Campari, Kitty Johnston was the head of Indies at that time. She's now a general manager at ALM. So there's been some incredible, trailblazing women well before me, but it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah, I'm sure. And finally, where to from here? You mentioned earlier the North Star of general management. Is that still the case? If so, where to from here?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, obviously I've been doing the acting sales director role as well as head of Indies. So understandably disappointed that I didn't get to step into that sales director role longer term. But at the same time, that head of Indies role is one that I wanted for a really long time. And I don't feel that I've been able to really give it the focus and the bandwidth that it deserved. It's one of the best roles in liquor. Anyone who works in liquor will tell you that head of Indies role, it's challenging, it's rewarding, you get to manage a really big team, but you also get to have a lot of fun. So my plan is to absolutely lean into that for the next little while, focus on my team and their development, really spend more time with my customers, but also have fun. I'm so privileged. I get to head off to Greece tomorrow on the IBA International Conference, and getting to do trips like that. I mean, yeah, it's such a privilege and an honor, and I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, my plan is lean into that role, have some fun, support my team and my customers with a lot more bandwidth than I've had in the last 12 months.
Amazing. I'm very envious of you escaping the Sydney cold. It's suddenly got very, very cold here. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great having you on. And for anyone listening, hope you enjoyed it too. We're here to support you with your career journey and to have similar conversations about your career and where you want to take things. So if you're seeking that sort of support, reach out to me or one of the team at AXR, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more career insights and advice from Australia's inspiring sales and marketing leaders. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.